All right, ready to dive into something really mind-bending.
Let's do it. Okay, let's get right into it. Think about a caterpillar, right? Chewing away, its little brain mapping out the best buffet route.
Yeah, just doing its caterpillar thing.
Then kaboom! Metamorphosis hits. It's like a biological reset button. Everything gets broken down, reassembled.
Really liquefied in some cases, yeah.
And out pops a butterfly, flitting around like its past life was just a dream. But here's the mind bender. What if it remembers some of those caterpillar lessons? How can information possibly survive that total system reboot? Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if our own memories aren't these rigid recordings, but something much more dynamic, constantly being reinterpreted?
That's the fascinating puzzle of the heart of this, isn't it? This seemingly strange ability of a butterfly to retain caterpillar memories offers us a powerful lens for understanding how intelligence, in all its forms, deals with change and maintains a sense of continuity.
Right.
The core insight here is that biological systems can preserve and repurpose learned information even through complete structural overhaul, a far cry from our rigid digital systems.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we're diving deep into today. Forget dry academic papers. Our source is a brilliant and engaging YouTube conversation with Michael Levin from Tufts University.
Levin's work, yeah. Really groundbreaking stuff.
This guy's lab tackles some seriously out-there questions about decision-making, not just in the animal kingdom, but in artificial systems and even these wild hybrid biological machines they're creating.
It's incredible, the range.
We're talking developmental biology, artificial life, bioengineering, synthetic morphology, which, put simply, is the creation of new biological forms in cognitive science. He's connecting dots across fields you wouldn't normally think of together.
A crucial aspect to consider is that Levin's work really challenges the traditional boundaries between these scientific disciplines. He's uncovering fundamental principles that appear to govern seemingly very different kinds of systems.
So our mission for this deep dive, and you're already locked in, so you're on board, is to unpack the central thesis of Levin's paper, Self-Improving Memory. Forget the image of memories as static files.
Right, not like a hard drive.
Levin argues that memories are actively reinterpreted, constantly being made relevant to the present moment. He even suggests they might have a kind of agency.
Agency, yeah, that's a really provocative part of it.
This isn't just about reminiscing, it's about understanding how we learn, adapt, and perhaps even define who we are. And since our source is a YouTube chat, expect our discussion to feel more like, well, a chat. Ready?
Absolutely. And this raises a really intriguing implication right from the start. How can learned behavior possibly persist through such a radical biological transformation? It's not just about the physical brain being dismantled and rebuilt. The entire context of the organism's life changes. The whole world is different for the butterfly.
Precisely. Picture that caterpillar soft-bodied, existing in a 2D world of leaves, its brain perfectly adapted for that life.
Crawling around, yeah.
Then comes the chrysalis, a complete reset. Almost everything is broken down and reorganized into a hard-bodied, flying butterfly navigating a 3D world with entirely new sensory tools and a completely different brain structure.
Massive reorganization.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Scientists, like the shaman group some time ago, and more recently, Doug Blackston from Levin's Center, discovered that if you train these caterpillars, say, to dislike a certain smell,
Right, aversion training.
the butterflies that emerge still remember that aversion.
The beauty of this model lies in recognizing the sheer scale of this transformation. It's not a minor system upgrade, it's a complete overhaul of the biological hardware. And yet, the core information endures. Somehow.
Exactly. And Levin's initial question, the spark for this whole line of thought, was, how does information even survive such a dramatic re-architecture of the medium? I mean, our computers can't do that.
No way. You wipe the drive, it's gone.
But then came an even more profound realization. It's not just about the butterfly retaining the caterpillar's specific memory of, say, how to find a particular leaf.
Right, because that's useless now.
That specific memory is now irrelevant to a nectar-sipping flying creature. Instead, those memories must be remapped onto this completely new biological system, made relevant to the butterfly's entirely different needs and actions.
So it's not the exact data, it's the lesson learned, the pattern.
Yes. It's not about recalling a specific route. It's about a more abstract learning that can be applied in a totally novel context. Think about that. Memory is adapting to a completely new configuration.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this immediately brings to mind a fundamental challenge faced by all living systems. the paradox of persistence.
Okay, let's unpack that. This paradox, which Levin credits to Baton, is essentially this. As a species, if you remain static, you're in trouble when the environment inevitably shifts. You become outdated.
Obsolete, yeah,
Oh.
like Blockbuster Video.
Exactly. But if you change too much, are you even the original species anymore? The initial identity is lost. So how do you manage to survive and persist while undergoing necessary fundamental change?
What's crucial here is understanding that this isn't just a philosophical brain teaser. It's a core biological imperative. Organisms must adapt to survive, but adaptation often necessitates significant alterations to their fundamental structure and function.
And this isn't just on the time scale of evolution, right? We experience this ourselves. Think about a deep educational journey, a truly life-altering experience. Even the changes of puberty, you emerge fundamentally different.
Yeah, good examples.
So is the past you still present in a meaningful way? Levin's paper proposes a generalized architecture, applicable both to individual cognition and the long arc of evolution, that attempts to explain how we maintain a sense of self through these essential fundamental shifts.
This leads us to the core of Levin's proposed mechanism, the bow tie, or autoencoder architecture.
Right, so picture a wide funnel on the left side, narrowing down to a very thin connection in the middle, and then widening out again into another wide funnel on the right.
Like an hourglass lying on its side, almost.
Yeah, or a bow tie. Or exactly like an autoencoder used in machine learning, where data is compressed and then reconstructed.
The core insight here is that this narrow bottleneck in the middle forces a compression and generalization of the information as it passes through.
It has to squeeze through.
It compels the system to extract the essential meaning, discarding the noise, which is crucial for adapting old information to new situations.
Exactly. Think of that left funnel, cognitively speaking, as all the specific sensory inputs and experiences you have brimming with fine details. If you're a single cell, it's all the specific molecular interactions happening on your surface.
All that raw data flooding in.
For us, it's the constant flood of sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches. But you can't possibly store every single tiny detail. It's not practical, and frankly, it wouldn't be very helpful for survival.
This connects to the idea that true intelligence isn't about perfect recall of every single data point, but about identifying the underlying patterns and rules that govern the world. You need the gist, not the encyclopedia.
So the information gets funneled down to that narrow bottleneck. Levin refers to this as the now moment. Here, all those specific instances are compressed and generalized into a simpler generative kernel.
Ah, the kernel.
Think of it as distilling the essence of many similar experiences into a core understanding. You don't remember the exact shade of green of every leaf you've seen, but you grasp the concept of leaf.
Right, the abstraction.
That compressed pattern is what gets stored as a memory anagram, essentially, a highly compressed, actionable summary of past experiences.
What's intriguing here is that the very act of compression inevitably involves losing some of the original information. Not every single detail can make it through that narrow bottleneck.
Then on the right side of the bow tie, this compressed memory trace gets reinflated into a coherent understanding of the present, guiding your actions. And this is where it gets really interesting. Levin suggests we should start thinking about our memories as messages being sent from our past selves.
If we reframe memories as a form of communication across time, it emphasizes the fact that the you of the past was, in a very real sense, a different agent with its own unique experiences and perspectives.
He even shared this fantastic tweet from Sam Gershman. Your most important collaborator is you 6 months ago, and he's not answering emails. Isn't that spot on?
That's perfect. Yeah.
All we have access to are the memory traces left behind by that past version of ourselves. We can't just pick up the phone and ask for more context.
This really highlights the active role that our present self plays in deciphering those memory traces. The meaning isn't automatically encoded within the trace itself. It's actively constructed by the current interpreter based on their present needs and understanding.
Especially because, as Levin points out, biology operates with a much more unreliable medium than our neat and tidy computational system.
Oh, absolutely. It's noisy. Things degrade, connections change.
Information in our brains isn't as stable and predictable as data in a computer. So when we reinflate those memory traces, because some information was lost in the compression, our current self has to actively reinterpret them, potentially in completely new ways that best fit the present context.
Yeah, you have to make it make sense now.
It's not about striving for perfect fidelity to the past. It's about the fundamental biological drive to use information adaptively right now. It's like reading an old diary. Your interpretation will always be colored by who you are today.
This idea of context-dependent interpretation connects very directly to the polycomputing paradigm, a concept developed by Josh Bongard and Levin.
Okay, so polycomputing. Give us the elevator pitch.
Okay, at its core, polycomputing proposes that a single physical event can be interpreted as computing different things by different observers.
Okay.
And all of those interpretations can be considered valid to the extent that they're adaptively useful to that particular observer. There isn't necessarily one single correct computation. It depends on who's looking and why.
So how does this tie into our discussion about memory?
Well, the meaning of a memory trace, that past physical event encoded in your brain, isn't fixed. It's actively constructed by your current self, the observer, based on your immediate needs and the surrounding context.
I see.
The exact same memory could compute entirely different meanings or guide different actions at different points in your life.
I see. So the left side of the bow tie, the compression, the inference, that's the more algorithmic part, a kind of efficient way of reducing the data.
Exactly. More predictable, maybe. But the right side, the reinflation, the interpretation, that's where the creativity and adaptability come into play. The original meaning isn't directly retrievable. You have to actively make sense of the remaining fragments.
So cognition becomes this ongoing process of making sense of things, constantly rebuilding our models of ourselves and the world based on these somewhat faded clues left behind by our past selves, like detective work.
Yeah, a kind of continuous sense-making. And if we broaden our view to the grand scale of evolution, this framework provides a powerful explanation for the incredible adaptability we observe in biological systems across all levels of organization.
Right, think about it. Unlike our meticulously designed technologies, biology functions with a fundamentally unreliable substrate.
Totally unreliable. It's amazing anything works sometimes.
Constant change mutations, errors in replication, unpredictable environmental shifts. You simply can't rely on all your components staying exactly the same.
This inherent instability necessitates a system that is constantly able to reinterpret and adapt. It's less about having perfect blueprints and more about possessing the ability to work effectively with whatever you currently have.
Yeah.
You got to improvise.
Levin provides this amazing example of newt kidney tubules. You can have newts with varying numbers of chromosomes, which means their cells are different sizes.
Right, different ploidy levels.
Yet somehow, the process of morphogenesis, the development of form, adjusts, employing novel mechanisms to construct a perfectly functional kidney. The same overall structure emerges from fundamentally different building blocks.
This beautifully illustrates the principle of having to play the hand you're dealt. Organisms inherit a genome, a vast amount of information passed down from ancestors. But they must interpret that information in a way that allows them to thrive in their current physical form and the environment they inhabit.
And this sheds light on some of the truly groundbreaking work happening in Levin's lab, right? Planaria regenerating heads of different species.
Wild stuff.
Xenobots built from frog cells exhibiting completely novel behaviors. Anthro-robots made from human cells performing actions that human tissue wouldn't normally do.
Exactly. The genetic information isn't a rigid instruction manual. It's more like a toolkit of possibilities that can be creatively reinterpreted depending on the new form and the surrounding context.
Yeah.
The meaning isn't fixed in the DNA alone.
This fundamental commitment to an unreliable substrate, coupled with the necessity for active reinterpretation, is, according to Levin, the very engine that drives biological plasticity and innovation.
And this leads to the concept of an intelligence ratchet.
Okay, tell us more about that.
Well, the idea is the more proficient agents become at reinterpreting information in flexible ways, the less constrained they are by the original intended meaning.
Ah, okay.
This opens up possibilities for increasingly creative and adaptive problem solving. Each successful reinterpretation sort of ratchets up the system's capacity for future novelty.
And this is where confabulation comes into the picture, right? Which sounds bad, but you're saying it isn't a flaw, but actually a beneficial feature.
Precisely. In this framework, yes. Confabulation, the brain's natural tendency to create explanations and narratives that make sense in the present moment, even if they don't perfectly align with past reality or complete information.
Making up stories, basically.
Becomes a valuable asset. In novel situations where there's no clear precedent, the ability to generate a useful story, even if it's not entirely historically accurate, can be critical for survival and navigating the unknown. It allows for action when faced with ambiguity.
So this capacity to essentially ignore what the information used to mean and to make up a story that helps you right now is actually a key driver of intelligence, leading to increasingly imaginative and on-the-fly reinterpretations.
It kickstarts that creative leap, yeah.
Okay, my understanding of how memory works has just been completely flipped. But hold on, there's another layer to this, isn't there? Let's talk about the idea of memories themselves having agency. That sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It does sound wild, but what's so thought-provoking about this is Levin's perspective on agency. He doesn't see it as some, magic property reserved only for certain types of beings like humans or maybe animals.
Right, not just consciousness.
Instead, he suggests that agency should be assessed empirically by applying the tools of behavioral and cognitive science to a wide range of systems, from molecular networks in individual cells to tissues and, yes, even patterns of information like memories.
How would you even test that?
It's about whether a system is actively working to solve problems within its specific problem space. That space might not be 3D movement. It could be metabolic regulation or maintaining tissue integrity or even just persisting as an information pattern.
So it's not just about whether something can walk or talk or consciously plan.
Exactly. Agency could manifest as a molecular network learning to regulate a metabolic pathway, or a tissue reorganizing itself during regeneration to achieve a functional form. It's about goal-directed behavior within a context.
And this leads to that really mind-bending thought experiment about hypothetical dense beings living deep within the Earth.
Right, the core dwellers.
Who might perceive us humans as fleeting, ephemeral patterns in a tenuous plasma. It really challenges our fundamental assumptions about what is real and what is merely a pattern.
It compels us to consider that we, too, are essentially temporary patterns existing within a larger metabolic space. The clear-cut distinction we often draw between real objects and the patterns they exhibit might actually be more of a continuous spectrum than we typically acknowledge.
And this is where the traditional way we think about computing gets turned upside down. Instead of viewing the machine as acting upon the data stored on a memory tape.
The standard Turing machine model, yeah.
What if we consider the patterns within the data, the information itself, as having a kind of driving force?
Think about it in terms of a spectrum of agential patterns. A fleeting thought might have a very minimal level of agency, barely there.
Okay.
But a persistent recurrent thought, the kind that entrenches itself in your mind and even reshapes your brain's connections, like an obsession or a core belief, likely has a greater degree of agency. It's actively working to persist. Then you could consider something like the different fragments within dissociative identity disorder, which clearly seem to have their own distinct goals and influence the overall personality.
Right, they seem like separate entities almost.
And then, of course, you have fully formed personalities. It's a continuum.
So this idea of active data, the concept that information patterns can have their own sort of life and actively strive to persist and even spread within their environment, like memes almost.
Sort of, yeah, but perhaps even more fundamentally. And this has some really intriguing practical implications. For instance, in the field of regenerative medicine, we might begin to view bioelectric patterns not just as passive signals of a morphogenetic intelligence guiding development,
Like readouts on a screen.
but as the active agents themselves. What if our physical body is essentially the tape, and these bioelectric patterns are the ones actually calling the shots in terms of growth and repair? The software driving the hardware, in a way.
Wow, okay, so we've established that memories are like transmissions from the past that require our active interpretation. Now, if memories can be viewed as having a form of agency, could information patterns more generally also be considered agential?
Levin's response is a cautiously optimistic yes, but he emphasizes that this is an empirical question that requires investigation using the tools we already have. We need to look for goal-directed behavior in these information systems.
What might be the inherent goals of a memory pattern if it were acting as an agent?
Well, perhaps a fundamental drive for persistence to continue existing, and maybe expansion to spread to other minds, colonize other thinkers, and influence more action spaces, like a successful idea.
And this connects with those fascinating memory transfer experiments, like training a sea slug, a plisja.
Yeah, the classic candle experiments, and then the RNA transfer work by Glanzman and others.
And then injecting its RNA into an untrained slug, which somehow leads to the transfer of that learned behavior.
What's truly remarkable about those experiments is that the transferred information seems to self-organize within the recipient's brain. It doesn't require precise step-by-step programming.
It just knows what to do.
It seems to find its place. There appear to be inherent incentives on both sides. Agents, like us or the slug, being good at reinterpreting information and information patterns that are somehow good at being reinterpreted for propagation. It's a coevolution, maybe.
But even these seemingly agential memories still face that fundamental paradox we talked about earlier.
Exactly, the paradox of persistence. They might change so much through reinterpretation that they eventually lose their original identity.
So the bow tie architecture we discussed earlier, it's not just an interesting shape or a theoretical model. It seems to be a fundamental pattern observed in both biology, like in signaling networks.
Yeah, things like calcium fluxes often show this convergence-divergence pattern.
And even in machine learning, forcing generalization through that critical narrow bottleneck.
And the really novel aspect here is applying this unifying framework to understand the deep similarities between cognition, how we think and learn, and development, how our physical bodies take shape.
Right, seeing morphogenesis as thinking.
It suggests that morphogenesis itself might be viewed as a fundamentally intelligent process, solving problems in morphological space. This principle appears to operate across the lifespan of an individual organism and also across the vast timescales of evolutionary lineages.
And this upcoming research on transcriptomics in xenobots and anthrorobots is a powerful example, right?
Yeah, the work looking at gene expression.
Even though these novel life forms share the same underlying DNA as their original tissues, their gene expression profiles, their transcriptomomes are radically different in their new embodiment.
Completely different. It's a striking illustration of how a new physical form, a new context, necessitates a fundamental reinterpretation of the given genetic information to enable a completely new kind of life, new behaviors, new goals.
So the two key unconventional ideas emerging here are this fundamental invariance or similarity between cognition and development.
And the potentially agential nature of information as it flows through these bow tie-like structures. Information isn't just passive stuff being processed.
Let's loop back to the concept of confabulation for a moment. We touched on examples in patients with split brains inventing reasons for actions.
Right, Gazaniga's classic work, the left brain explaining what the right brain did.
And those undergoing brain stimulation who laugh and then create a reason why they laughed. It really highlights this fundamental human tendency to construct coherent narratives about ourselves and the world around us, even when the underlying information is incomplete or misleading.
We seem to have a deep need for a coherent story. But it's important to consider the potential downsides as well. When the horizon of information becomes very short, maybe due to stress or cognitive limitations,
Illusion.
and we lose sight of longer-term patterns and broader context, confabulation, while providing a locally coherent explanation, might lead us astray in the bigger picture.
And the comparison to AI hallucinations is interesting. We see similar functional outcomes, AI systems generating seemingly plausible but factually incorrect outputs based on their training data.
Yeah, making things up confidently.
While the underlying mechanisms are likely different, we don't know for sure, it raises important questions about the nature of creative interpretation versus strict factual recall.
The real challenge, the deep issue, is understanding the specific mechanisms that enable this creative interpretation when our brains decode these compressed memory engrams. How did that reinflation actually work?
This resonates with Greg Henriquez's concept of self-justifying apes, which focuses on the human tendency to rationalize our actions and beliefs.
Right, the justification hypothesis. But Levin extends this idea, suggesting that a more primitive form of storytelling, the creation of actionable models of oneself and the environment, is likely essential for all effective agents, even down to the level of single cells striving for survival.
So even a bacterium needs a basic story about good stuff here, bad stuff there.
In a functional sense, yes. A way to categorize the world to guide action. And it really makes you wonder if we could even reinterpret something like Joseph Campbell's archetypes or other fundamental storytelling frameworks at the level of single cells and biological pathways.
Whoa. Okay, like the hero's journey for a protein.
Maybe not literally, but the basic need for agents to perceive and model other agents in their environment. Perhaps starting with coarse-grained categories like danger or food or cooperator versus competitor, eventually leading to more complex self-modeling and even self-awareness. There might be fundamental patterns to how agents model their worlds.
And we see how effective storytelling is in simplifying complex ideas, right? Good teachers do it all the time.
Absolutely. Relatable anecdotes, giving personalities to abstract concepts. It leverages our natural capacity for narrative. And we can even see echoes of this bow tie architecture in human communication.
How so?
Complex mental states, thoughts, feelings are compressed into the relatively limited bandwidth of language, spoken or written words.
The bottleneck.
And then they are expanded and interpreted, hopefully, in the listener's brain, based on their own context and understanding. Similarly, concise scientific findings presented in a paper are then expanded upon and contextualized by the reader.
So what are some of the exciting directions for future research in this area? Where does this go next?
Well, there's ongoing computational work, like by Kusa-Parksa and Levin's group, exploring the connection between the polycomputing framework and this bow tie model more formally.
Okay, modeling it.
And on the biological side, a major focus is on further elucidating the precise mechanisms that enable this creative remapping of memory engrams in novel situations. How does the butterfly actually remap that caterpillar learning?
Right, the nitty-gritty.
Synthetic morphology models, like the anthro-robots and xenobots, are proving invaluable for studying how systems can break free from their evolutionary history and creatively reinterpret existing biological capabilities for entirely new behaviors.
Because you're forcing them into a new context.
Exactly. These models allow us to observe how memories, in the form of genetic and physiological predispositions that weren't specifically evolved for the new form, are ingeniously adapted. But as Levin cautions, this bow tie with a narrow middle, while enabling creativity and adaptation, it can also potentially lead to unexpected and even undesirable outcomes. You lose information. You reinterpret sometimes that reinterpretation might lead down a path we'd consider, disease or dysfunction. It's not always beneficial novelty.
Right. So some truly mind-blowing takeaways from this deep dive. The idea that our memories aren't just static recordings, but are actively reinterpreted messages from our past selves.
A constant dialogue across time, yeah.
The bow tie architecture as a fundamental pattern operating across all scales of biological and cognitive organization, from cells to societies, maybe.
Seems incredibly general, yeah.
And the really provocative notion that information patterns themselves might possess a form of agency.
That one really stretches the mind, doesn't it?
This perspective really encourages us to rethink our fundamental assumptions about memory, intelligence, and even the nature of life itself.
It certainly does. Makes you think about how this perspective might shift your own understanding of your memories, how you learn new things, and even your sense of self. Are we all, in a way, constantly rewriting our own stories?
It suggests a much more fluid and dynamic view of who we are and how we engage with the world, always becoming.
Yeah, less fixed, more process.
We highly recommend that you delve further into the fascinating work of Michael Levin and the concepts we've discussed today. We'll be sure to include relevant links. And who knows, perhaps our next deep dive will explore Levin's compelling paper on stress sharing as a form of cognitive glue between cells.
Oh, that's another fantastic one. There's definitely a wealth of fascinating material to explore in his research. A lot to unpack there, too.
Thanks so much for joining us on this personalized deep dive. We hope it sparks some new ways of thinking about memory and the remarkable ability of life to learn and adapt.